Go ahead and take a look at the structures for your urinary system, the urinary system part of your practical. This model, what we're looking at is a progressively more microscopic view of the kidney. This is kind of the most macroscopic structure here, and this would be the smallest or the most microscopic structure all the way to the right. The kidney, which we see here, has a couple overarching pieces to it, and that would be the first two structures on your word list, and that's the cortex and the medulla. So the cortex is this more superficial layer, outer layer of renal tissue, and the medulla is this inner portion of renal tissue. You can think of the orientation of the cortex and the medulla as a Tootsie Roll pop, with the outer candied part of the Tootsie Roll pop representing the cortex and the inner Tootsie Roll candy representing the medulla. The next structure to identify is the renal pelvis, and we see the renal pelvis right here. So the renal pelvis is really a funnel-shaped tube structure that is receiving urine from these smaller tubes, and these smaller tubes we're going to get to shortly. Renal pyramids, if we take a look at the kidney, you can see that within the medulla there are these triangular shaped pieces of tissue. Those are known as renal pyramids. If we take a look at this structure here, essentially what we're looking at in this structure is we are looking at if we were to take one of these renal pyramids out of the medulla, in addition to the cortex that sits just superficial to that pyramid, that's what we'd be seeing here. So this would be representing one of these renal pyramids with its associated cortex, superficial cortex, just sitting outside of that pyramid. The next structure to identify is the renal papilla. You can think of renal papilla as the apex of each renal pyramid. So again, we see this triangular shaped renal pyramid. The apex of that pyramid, which I'm pointing to here with the probe, those are renal papilla. In this zoomed in view of a pyramid, this would be the renal papilla area here. Renal column is an extension of the renal cortex that goes into the medulla and separates renal pyramids. So if we take a look over here, you can see these two renal pyramids are separated by this tissue, which is an extension of cortical tissue that goes into the medullary region. This would be a renal column. A renal lobe is, we can define a renal lobe as a renal pyramid and the associated cortex, or the superficial cortex that sits just outside of that pyramid, in addition to half of a renal column to one side of that pyramid and half of a renal column to the other side of that pyramid. So we'd be looking at a renal lobe right here. A minor calyx and a major calyx. So this is the tube system structures that I was mentioning converge to form the funnel-shaped renal pelvis. The minor calyx is the initial smallest part of this tube system, and each renal papilla or apex of the renal pyramid is creating, urine is being drained from that renal papilla, and it is draining into a minor calyx. So we see a minor calyx here, we see a minor calyx here, we see a minor calyx here. When we get two or more minor calyces that converge to form a larger tube structure, that would be a major calyx. So here we would see a major calyx. This would be a major calyx here because it is the merging of these minor calyces.